Hi, this is Francis Wade, and welcome to another in our series from Framework Consulting on strategic planning. And this time around, we're going to be looking at the question of whether or not your company should map its strategy. So, what's that all about?
Hi, this is Francis Wade.
Well, let's take a look.
Welcome to another in our series from Framework.
So, very quickly, the strategy mapping technique was invented by Kaplan and Norton in about 2001, and it was very exciting for people like me because it offered a brand new way to help companies plan their strategy, to share the strategy, to create a picture from it rather than just leave it in words, and to capture. I'll show you some of the benefits of doing it. So it was a very exciting moment, and it opened up a new possibility of the way we could do our retreats with our clients. However, it's still not widely adapted. There are many companies who are still writing big documents full of strategy, or they have consultants come in and write their strategy for them. And I believe the results are far less than optimal. Well, many reasons why, but it has to deal with or do with the fact that strategy needs to be made and decided and owned by people in a company, and mapping is one way in which that can happen. So today we're really talking about not just strategy mapping as a technique and as a way to create a nice picture, but strategy mapping during your strategy retreat. That's a lot more tricky. So what is it all about? Well, the problem that you're trying to solve is one that's age-old, which is that companies find that there's a big gap between the energy and the excitement and the vision that comes from a strategic planning retreat and what actually happens just a few months later. Ask the question, well, who's working on the strategy? And in the typical executive meeting, as you look around the room, you get some pretty lame answers. Go a level down below to the managerial level and go to the employee level and you get all blank looks. And there are studies that show that most employees have no idea what the strategy of their company is. So they ask questions like, where did that list of projects come from? And if you're to deal with the traditional or the typical executive team 6 months after the retreat and show them a list of strategic projects, they often ask, well, where did that come from? What's that list all about? Why are these projects even important? And do our people even know what these projects are? And the fact that they're strategic, if they are? These are the kind of questions that I hate to say, even 1 or 2 months after a retreat, the kinds that are asked by executives who were in the retreat. I'll say why that happens in just a minute, but let's just consider that as that's what the research says. So 2/3 to 3/4 of large organizations really struggle in this area. So this is a problem that they have not been effective in solving, and they don't know exactly why. Only some 11% of managers believe that all their company's strategic priorities have the financial and human resources needed for success. In other words, they know that the strategy has been set up, but all of the work to make the strategy real doesn't happen. And it's not altogether surprising because implementing strategy is really calling for a change in behavior. And as you probably know, we human beings are very weak at it. Instead, we are pretty much happy with business as usual. And we'd much rather coast along, sort of enjoying the comfort of the way things are, than implement a strategy which calls for us to transform ourselves in order to produce a whole different level of results. So people become jaded by the whole planning process. After a few cycles, maybe they would have been excited in the first one. After those few cycles where nothing gets implemented, they become a bit cynical, tired of the whole thing. And when it comes around, they are only willing to suffer through it rather than to really make it work. As a result, your company misses out on strategic opportunities. And in another video, I mentioned the very big one that Kaplan Wireless company here in Jamaica missed when the mobile market opened up. It allowed the entrance of Digicel, which has now become a not just the major mobile phone provider here in Jamaica, but it's become a major force in the Caribbean, it's in Latin America, it's in the Pacific. And the reason that it's in so many markets is because it's all traced back to the success they had in Jamaica and the fact that the incumbent, Kaplan Wireless, didn't take its entrance seriously. And chances are they did have a strategic planning retreat that year, and a company that doesn't effectively deal with its strategy ends up missing these opportunities and not seeing where they are at risk. So the traditional sort of way to deal with a problem is to, I mentioned this before, make a list of projects and just assign them to different people. Doesn't really work if all it is just a list of projects, because this list relies on the participants in the retreat remembering exactly where each project came from. And that's difficult because the conversations that happen in the retreat are so intricate and so in depth that it's really easy for someone who is not an expert in all the areas, like the CEO might be, to remember what IT said about this and what the COO said about that and what HR said about this. So they lose the what's called the hypothesis, which I'll describe in a minute. Another sort of popular technique is to send around a Gantt chart looking like this. A little bit better than the list from the prior slide, but again runs into the same problems. This is just like a list with dates. The underlying reason why the project exists is not captured. It's forgotten. So the hypothesis has to do with why Project Alpha, which shows up on your list or on your Gantt chart, even exists in the first place. And you may recall the first reason why, but in the retreat you go to 4, 5, 6 levels of why we're doing this, why we're doing this, why we're doing this, why we're doing that, why we're doing this, all of which add up to Project Alpha. And to implement Project Alpha effectively, you need to know the chain of reasoning that brought about Project Alpha in the moment. You know, some companies record their strategic planning retreat specifically for this reason, to recapture the thinking that went into decisions that were made. So the reason you'd want to map or consider mapping is to capture this hypothesis. However, most companies don't understand that capturing this hypothesis is important and mapping is the way to do it. So I'm going to explain why map. So here, for example, this is a public sector map, which is a little bit different than a private sector map. You can see that there are different activities the company is undertaking in the next year, and they're meant to exist with each other. And you can see that there are some cause and effect relationships happening inside the map, where, for example, at the bottom left, increasing a knowledge of governance is intended to improve budget efficiencies, which is intended to enhance cost control, which is intended to increase rate competitiveness, which is intended to improve customer satisfaction and be the provider of choice to the public. And this happens to be a utility. So the thinking is very different than a for-profit. So you map in order to preserve this logic. So the first reason is to show or demonstrate cause and effect relationships, not just for the team to act as an artifact of a powerful strategic planning conversation, but also people who weren't there, so that they can know why. Okay, so I'm going to focus on just this yellow, what they've called the corporate citizenship and safety theme, I guess. And in this case, they've decided to implement safety as a value, a kind of education and training, in order to install cameras on engines. Forget what kind of company this is. Well, I guess it's a railroad to prevent derailment, which would then reduce accidents. And for the customer, it would improve the customer and community safety and environmental awareness, which in turn would decrease costs and increase goodwill, which would in turn increase profits and sustain profitability. So there's a logic, and the map is intended to capture and keep that logic so that it can be explained and shared with a much wider audience. So how is it built? Well, it's very easy. You start with a blank template and a time frame. So in this case, it's a for-profit company, so it's the top perspective is financial. Second one is from the view of the customer. The third is what we changed the name slightly and call it the process perspective, which has to do with your internal operations. And then finally, the people perspective, which I think explains itself. So you start with a blank template and a time frame. In this case, this company has chosen 2 years. It's always a short-term time frame, by the way, if you really want your map to be descriptive. Some companies have tried long-term time frames and their maps either become too busy to be understood or too vague to have any real value. So pick a short-term horizon. And so the next step is to focus on the financial perspective. So in this company, they wanted to increase revenue to 20 million and decrease expenses by 20%. So from a financial perspective, just viewing the company as a financial not institution, but a financial entity. In this case, it's about producing these particular financial results, which in turn drive shareholder value. From the perspective of its customers, however, customers don't care about your revenue or your expenses. They care about the experience they're having. So the logic is that in order to increase revenue to 20 million and decrease expenses, what you would need to do is to deliver an experience in which the customers say, okay, well, that's much faster than it was before. So you can see that you're building a cause and effect relationship between the customer perspective and the financial perspective. You continue by building the process perspective. And here the company has decided to purchase modern machinery and to change the order process. So they're doing some process changing, process transformation, and these are intended to improve the customer experience and then drive financial perspective, which will then drive shareholder value. And finally, there's the people perspective. So there's training in new machinery, which will allow you to purchase that new machinery. There's acquiring business process management expertise, which could mean some hiring. That would allow you to change the order process. It could mean bringing in outside expertise also. In either case, the purpose is to change the order process. Again, you can see that doing these activities in the people perspective allow you to create these changes at the process perspective, which then allow you to change the experience the customers are having from their perspective, which then allow you to change the results, the financial results of the company, when the company is seen from the financial perspective. And again, these are meant to drive shareholder value. So when an employee asks 3 months from now, which they do, and you're lucky if they ask, because many times they simply ignore or pretend as if they understand when they don't. Why are we spending all this money on training for new machinery we don't own? And why are we hiring re-engineering expertise? So they all they see are the directives passed down to them by their manager or supervisor. And they think to themselves, or they ask out aloud, so why are we spending all this money and why are we hiring re-engineering people? Well, the answers, of course, come straight back to the strategy map. The training is in order to purchase the modern machinery. So the training is going to take place, maybe in this case, before the machinery is even bought. And we're hiring re-engineering people because we need their process management expertise so that we can re-engineer the change order process. So an employee who doesn't know the map or has never had the opportunity to understand or have the map explained to them would ask the questions that I just shared. However, a company that's careful to train its employees, or rather share with its employees, expose them to the map for the next 2 years, wouldn't get those kinds of questions, not at that level, because the employee would already understand and be able to contextualize the training and the hiring. So the map allows you to very quickly share the thinking, the hypotheses that were developed during the strategic planning retreat. So the big reason why we advocate and we practice developing the map in the retreat with everyone present is because you need all 4 perspectives in the room at the very least in order to build these cause and effect relationships. When you don't have them, you end up with miscues. You end up with vague statements. You end up with the lack of the in-depth understanding that allow you to produce these cause and effect relationships and to add them to your diagram. So doing them with everyone in the room is the most powerful way. We don't advocate, as I mentioned before, having someone go off and do this on their own, or have the CEO put it together, or worse, have a consultant come in and draw your map for you. That doesn't work from our experience. What works is having the entire team put it together. Now, you may have someone there to facilitate you through the process, have someone to clean it up at the end so it looks pretty, but the core thinking needs to happen by the executive team. It's the only way they can own it. Okay. So finally, of course, the last step is to share the map. So once you've developed it or made the decision to pursue it, and then you share it, finally you and your employees see it, they can understand why they're being asked to do certain things and why the company is going on a particular task. The first time we ever did a map, we actually did it on paper. Nowadays we do it via multimedia, and it was done on flip chart paper. And the CEO who we did it with was so excited, she grabbed it and shared it as it was, written up in awful marker. It was not pretty. Shared it with a senior management team that she had that meeting that she happened to be having that evening. And she reported that they were excited about the future of the company for the first time. They finally understood where the firm was going for the very first time. So, if you're interested in learning more about strategy mapping and the other techniques that we use and advocate and talk about in our strategic planning retreats and in our work, we have a free compilation of the best articles I've written for the Gleaner. It's called Strategic Planning Problems in Caribbean Companies, based on our experience across the region. And this is accessible via a free download. As you can see, the URL is right there, but I'm going to give it to you in just a minute. So this business about putting together a map and sharing it is really all about empowering the executives, yes, but the bulk of people who are going to be taking actions to fulfill the strategy aren't the executives. They are the select rank and file employees who, when they understand the big picture, will be able to manage the projects, figure out shortcuts, end projects if they're not going in the right direction, do all of those things within the right context. And if that context isn't transparent to them, then they won't know how to implement what you're asking them to do, or they may implement it badly, or they might not implement it at all, because as far as they're concerned, it's just something else you asked for. It has no other importance to them. But when they can see how it fits into the overall strategy and how their role in executing it is important, it changes the whole equation. So the strategy map is really an opportunity to engage employees at this very deep level that a strategy document in words or one of those big thick ones in binders just doesn't do. But you got to understand, the average employee does not have an MBA from Columbia, for example. They haven't attended an Ivy League university the way sometimes a CEO or other executives have. Furthermore, they're not thinking about strategy on a daily basis. So they don't see how things fit together. And by not seeing how things fit together, they come up with their own logic. And that makes it difficult for them to implement what they need to do the way you, an executive, would. So the map serves as the glue to connect executive strategy with people who don't think about strategy on a regular basis, so that they can implement it within the right context. So you may not like the format of the strategy map, but a visual representation of the logic and the hypotheses, the cause and effect relationships, is, as far as Kaplan, Norton, and we at Framework Consulting, is an absolute must. So once again, here's the URL for the download. I'll have to read it off the screen. https://goo.gl/w, the number 7, lowercase z, lowercase a, uppercase q, and the number 7. And I'm keen to hear how you're implementing this idea of strategy mapping. Even if you're already doing it, I learn a lot from people who share with me how they use the map. And if you want to get in touch with me to share with me how you're doing, or even to ask a question, you can do so at http://replytofrancis.info. So this is Francis Wade from Framework Consulting, signing out once again, another in our series on strategic planning. Take care, and I hope you all the best. Wish you all the best as you implement your strategy.